I re-listened to every Beatles album from start to finish. Going to be ranking them. To me, this is the greatest band of all time. You can be a contrarian. You can be a contrarian to the point where you say some crazy like this. But let's be honest, we know that this is the most influential and impactful band in the entire history of the planet. I'm not gonna talk about like the music composition or how the strings were attached here that led into. I'm not gonna be doing that. I can't really bring too much else to the table. It's the Beatles. It's all been said underneath the sun already. How I'm gonna kind of go about this, it's gonna be a shorter, condensed video. It's just gonna be me talking about my love for the Beatles, what each record means to me to some degree or the next. Talking about my personal experiences and how each record makes me feel as a whole. So let's get into it. So first off, we have Beatles for Sale. Starts off really strong, ends really strong, pretty consistent throughout the middle. Again, I'm not gonna be saying, oh, this record's so great, because spoiler alert, all these records are great from one extent all the way to the next. I don't have that much of a deeper connection with this record that I do with the other ones that are gonna be coming, but still one that you can't just pass up. I am gonna be putting all three of my favorite songs from each record somewhere in that area. Up next we have With the Beatles. For me, it's kind of like an extension of Please Please Me, kind of more of like that 50s inspired sound, something that I enjoy, something that kind of takes me back to, you know, being a kid and bobbing my head. So up next we have Help. On Help, you do have a couple deeper songs in there, but for the most part it is a lot of catchy jingles. It's just a lot of fun. It brings a lot of excitement. I feel excited every time I listen to the record. After that we have Hard Day's Night. I just remember watching the Hard Day's Night movie. Kind of made me see a different side of the Beatles, more of like their personalities. Always had a good time with listening to the track as well. It's a Hard Day's Night. Up next, we have Let It Be. So Let It Be is, you know, the ending of the Beatles as a collective. I enjoy this record personally because you get to see the nitty gritty of the Beatles. It was obviously towards their end. Paul dissing John, John dissing Paul, George dissing both of them. Does resonate with a lot of people, especially me. More so their popular stuff on this album that I kind of resonate with. I do still, however, like Dig a Pony and For You Blue. Two of Us is a strong way to start the album. That's one that I revisit often. Yeah. Next was Let It Be. Up next is Please Please Me. Album that started it all. Man, my introduction to the Beatles. Yeah, one of the greatest debut albums of all time. I just think back to the Ed Sullivan Show. I think back to like the black and white era. Still like more kind of like 50s inspired sound, but you know, with the Beatles twist on it. So Please Please Me is up next. All right, here's where we start getting controversial. I still really love this album. The next two are going to be kind of, depending on how I feel, you can kind of flip them around depending on the day. But up next is Revolver. Kind of going towards a more psychedelic sound. Nothing crazy, but you can kind of see where it was leading especially whenever Sgt. Pepper came. But this one, it just hits you so hard with a lot of these tracks. For No One is my personal favorite, as y'all can see over here. This is probably one of the most impressive albums from the Beatles lyrically. I know there's some people I know where this is their favorite Beatles album, and for good reason. So up next is Revolver. Up next we have one of the most influential albums of all time, Sgt. Pepper. Like all these albums, not a bad track on there, at least for me personally. It's an experience. Yeah, it's Sgt. Pepper. I can't really say anything other than how it makes me feel. That's how it makes me feel. An album that influenced a lot of probably your favorite artists. Up next, it's probably the Beatles' most experimental album. There's some crazy going on here. You have things that range from Obla Di Obla Da to Helter Skelter. You have songs like Let's Do It in the Road, transitioning to I Will. Like, this album is all over the place. It's crazy, but I love it. One second you're listening to like this deep, heartfelt song, and then the next moment you're listening to Number 9. I know that track is a big reason why people just kind of dismiss the album as a whole. I don't blame them for disliking the song, but to kind of diminish the greatness of this album is kind of insane off of one track. And even at that, I'm not going to say that it's a good track, but it's one that I've kind of learned to appreciate. It's kind of like a glimpse into John Lennon's insanity. For better or worse, it is interesting. Up next, there's gonna be a lot of Beatles fans that are gonna go, wow, you have that over Revolver, Sgt. Pepper, the White Album? Like, really? And my answer is yes. Magical Mystery Tour. This album, all the way, and don't get me wrong, Magical Mystery Tour and Fool on a Hill are great songs, but all the way from Flying, which is a transitional piece, all the way to probably Penny Lane, it takes me back to being a kid, sitting in a room. The whole outside world around me does not matter. It's just me sitting there, listening to these great songs in the moment, so full of innocence, so full of purity, so full of curiosity, so full of imagination. And it just takes me on a trip. And not like in a trip in that sense, but in a trip where, you know, it allows me to kind of explore the curiosities of the world and really ponder of what's really out there. Especially when listening to this as a kid, completely blew my mind. So this is an album that I hold very dear to me. So Magical Mystery Tour is number 3. Up next is an album that I consider the greatest Beatles album for the longest time, up until a few days ago with my re-listens. That is Rubber Soul. It's one that I came up with, you know, throughout childhood a lot. Tracks that can make you either bob your head, or tracks that can make you have a crisis while listening to Nowhere Man. It's like, yeah, maybe he is a bit like you and me, huh? Yeah, this is an album that I can kind of just throw on the turntable, you know, cook myself a little something, get a little drink, and just chill out. For the longest time, I did consider this the best Beatles album. That was until my re-listen. And you know, if you're a Beatles fan, or if you don't even have to be a Beatles fan to kind of know what's coming next, but before I get to that, I do want to give an honorable mention to Yellow Submarine. Obviously, it's not really technically a Beatles album, but I did want to give George Martin his flowers. And of course, no drum roll needed. It's Abbey Road. It's one of those albums where you cannot skip a track. Kind of like with other albums where you just kind of sit down, listen from start to finish. Just let the experience hit you. Come together, immediately go to something which, in my opinion, is the Beatles' best song, and that says a whole lot. Even Frank Sinatra said it was one of the greatest love songs written in the past, like, what, 100 years? Hearing the transition from I Want You to Here Comes the Sun, everything just cuts to nothing, and you just hear the dun 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 dun. People who don't like the Beatles can appreciate this album to at least some degree. At least I hope so. If not, you know, it is what it is. I was just in my car just like appreciating everything and appreciating the Beatles and everything that they've done. And then, you know, tracks like The End where it says, and in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. That just says it all. It's Abbey Road, what hasn't been said about it. To me, it's the greatest Beatles album of all time. Thank y'all for watching. Like I said, it's just gonna be a shorter video. I'm not gonna dive too deep into it. Again, this is the Beatles catalog. I told you on the beginning, all these albums are great. I'm not gonna like break it down. I'm just gonna tell you my rankings and, you know, what the records mean to me personally. Obviously, on a deeper level, these records I can really get into. I just kind of want to give a gist of my appreciation for the Beatles, what they mean to me, and what they mean to so many others. Once again, thank y'all for watching. See y'all in the next one.